Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the Nonprofit Learning Lab for today's workshop. If you have any questions along the way for our presenter, you can type them in the GoToWebinar chat box, likely on the right-hand side of your screen. If you have any tech questions, you can also type them there. We will be sending out the recording and material from today's workshop by the end of the day tomorrow, so keep an eye out for that email. And without further ado, I will now hand it over to you, Maria.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Welcome everybody to this Nonprofit Learning Lab webinar with the intriguing title of Using Data and Evaluation to Strengthen Resilience, Navigate Change, and Build Power. We have a lot to get through today, so we're going to jump in. But first, just a little intro of who I am. So my name is Maria Posey. I am born in Sweden with a multicultural background. I'm currently in the DC area, and I'm passionate about social systems and supporting nonprofit organizations towards achieving their greatest potential and impact. We're going to be talking about evaluation and data today, but that also feeds into other aspects of my work, which include strategic communication, fund development, fundraising, and strategic planning, which are all part of the services for my consulting company, Viking Impact Advisors, which is an homage to my heritage. All right, so that's a little bit about me. I hope in the Q&A I'll have a chance to get to know a little bit about who you are, and also that we have a chance to follow up after today's session, as I know 30 minutes will go by quickly. The first thing we're going to do is to set our baseline to just get a sense of who's in the room today and how data and evaluation fit into your current work. We're going to then explore the concepts of data and evaluation in a few different ways to really think about in ways beyond just compliance monitoring, how we can leverage data and evaluation to be forward-thinking, proactive about where we want to go with our organizations. I'm going to give you a tool today that you can use to kind of assess the power of your own data and evaluation practices that will hopefully enable some curious thinking and maybe adaptive practices in your data and evaluation work. We'll leave a few minutes for Q&A at the end. So if anything pops up along the way, just drop those into the Q&A section of the GoToWebinar, and we will get to as many as we can. So let's start with setting the baseline. You can scan this QR code or just type into your web browser. This should take you to our live polling platform, and we'll be able to look at the results live. So give everybody a chance to do that. And then we'll start, hopefully I can start to see some of those responses come in. Simply getting a sense of how important data and evaluation is to your organization at the moment. Options being absolutely mission critical, important but not always prioritized, sort of neutral, could take it or leave it, or not really a major focus, just to get a sense of where data and evaluation currently fits. And I can see some responses coming in quickly. This crew is obviously used to taking polls. I think COVID helped us all become more digitally literate. So these are some of the responses that I've gotten so far, with many putting it there towards mission critical, important, but maybe not always prioritized. Only one response saying it's not really a major focus. Okay, so not surprisingly, since you chose to tune in for this webinar, data and evaluation is important to your organization. So then let's look to the next question, which is, how equipped do you feel like your organization is to conduct meaningful evaluation and use data for decision making? So again, this isn't just collecting, participant numbers or distribution numbers or visitor numbers for the sake of meeting some checkmark requirement, but actually conducting meaningful evaluation that shows you how well your program is doing vis-a-vis your goals, and using that data to continuously learn and improve on your program. This is a different QR code, I'm afraid, and a different web address to go to. So hopefully we can pivot quickly. Okay, some folks already there. Great. Refresh, get some more responses. Fantastic. Okay, so here we see folks somewhat equipped. Some responses very well equipped. You're already doing this. That's great. Most seem to fall in that somewhat equipped, so you're doing some aspects, but maybe you're thinking of a few things that could be improved. Some honestly sharing that they're not very equipped. Somebody never evaluated before. Okay, well, wherever you are on your evaluation journey, hopeful that this session will give you some new things to think about, some additional tools to consider, and just thinking about data and evaluation in maybe new and different ways. Okay, so thank you so much for humoring me with the poll. Let's continue on with where we go from here, just knowing that there's a wide variety, as is often the case when I facilitate data and evaluation sessions. There's a broad mix of experiences in the room, and as much as possible, we're going to try to offer something for everybody. Okay, so moving on, let's see some of these different ways that we can put our data and evaluation practices to work. And this gets back to the title of the session, which was to strengthen resilience, navigate change, and build power. We're going to look at each of those things in turn. But first, let's just make sure that we're aligned on what I mean when we talk about strategic use of data versus compliant use of data. So most organizations will have some way of collecting data for reporting purposes to donors, your board, the executive leadership of your organization. Maybe you use it for fundraising. Maybe you use it to communicate outward to various audiences. So these are, reporting on performance numbers, on output numbers, maybe even outcome numbers. What we're going to be talking about today is going beyond just reporting on what your programs are doing and communicating about your programs to various audiences, but really thinking about how can your organization in its own entity and its own strength and power learn from, evolve with, and influence the world around it to grow and sustain, especially in these times of uncertainty. So let's talk about these three sort of strategic elements on their own. We're going to start with resilience. So with resilience, we want to be responsive to the world around us. Resilience isn't just about reacting. In fact, it's not really much about reacting at all. It's about proactively predicting and planning for possible future scenarios. It's about seeing potential risks early and scenario planning for different possible futures that are out there so that when they play out, you're not caught unaware. And just like when we evaluate our own programs, we can use quantitative and qualitative data to do this. So in this instance, we're not at all looking at our own data, but we're looking at data around us. Quantitatively, this could mean looking at macro trends, such as our key funders' evolving priorities, the policy landscape around us for government, for corporations, for global affairs, economic conditions, changing demographics, external quantitative variables that if we have our eye towards, we can pick up on and factor into our own organizational planning. This sort of macro trend analysis, looking at numbers, is of course, like always, supplemented with qualitative information that you could get from conversations with your funders and policymakers, where they may surface different experiences or knowledge that they have. And then together, these two pieces, the quantitative numbers and the qualitative insights, form a picture of what's happening in the world around you, that you then can internally prepare for. And of course, the big one that we're all facing today is just the shifting in priorities from the federal government and the sort of attack on DEIA practices and language. And you know, we thought that might be coming back already end of last year, beginning of this year. Now we know it's here. We know several federal programs and funding streams have been cut as a result of these priority shifts. And many organizations I know and that I work with have already taken stances on whether they are going to themselves adjust language and presentations and programs, or stand their ground on principle because it's a reflection of their organizational identity to do so. If you have not already taken this sort of external variable into account, this is certainly something worthwhile doing, and certainly it's driven by the federal government. It's still to be determined how the philanthropic community is going to respond. We don't yet know, between various philanthropies and individual donors, how, whether they will follow along with this trend, or whether they will, some have done, lean into continuously supporting DEIA initiatives and organizations. But either way, it's important for each and every organization in this context to understand from their perspectives and the donors and funders and policymakers that they interact with, what is the current stance on this and how should we proactively react. Okay, so that's just an example of a macro trend and how we can adjust our own evaluation and messaging should we choose to do so. So for example, an organization that is deciding or has decided to adjust to the shifting federal priorities, maybe federal funding is really mission critical to this organization, we could reframe DEIA from focusing on historically marginalized communities to, quote, advancing participation for everyone facing barriers, and focus maybe more on inclusion of all people rather than diversity and equity, as I know some organizations have done. It could also be an opportunity to shift funding priorities altogether if it becomes challenging to rely on federal funding, such as exploring corporate social responsibility opportunities, or individual donors within your communities, community foundations and things like that. So that's on resilience. And moving on then to change or adaptive learning, which is really just the fancy way of saying continuous improvement. Taking the data that you have, not just from the external environment, but also from your own programs, and using that to evolve and adjust. I had an opportunity to conduct a program evaluation recently for a local nonprofit that for the past couple of years had been delivering workforce career supports to at-risk opportunity use in our local Tri-County area. And they've been reporting on, participants served, participants going into the program, staying in the program, enrolling in high school, enrolling in higher education, but had not really looked at deeper disaggregations. They've been collecting the data, but had not yet had a chance to fully analyze the data and look at comparisons between population groups and comparisons between their youth participating in the program vis-a-vis the general population. And so by really digging into the data, we were able to understand that certain demographics were faring better and having higher success rates in the program, using quantitative data to really run some statistical analysis on probabilities and likelihoods of remaining and graduating given predictive variables compared to peers who were not in the program. And by doing that evaluation, we uncovered that youth who were also residents of their affordable housing program were more likely to remain compared to residents who were not. We don't know why though, and that was okay to not know why, because even just having that quantitative finding allowed us to go to the original funder of the program and say, we have this interesting finding. Please allow us to explore this further and build out this model and essentially shift the program from being more broadly available to everyone and instead just narrow down on the affordable housing connection and figure out what it is about this organization's ability to link affordable, stable housing with career supports for youth, and take another year essentially to figure out, well, what is the secret sauce here? And the donor, even though, this wasn't a super fancy finding and really just an ask to continue on for another year, was willing to fund the program and in fact increase his investment in the program to do some more qualitative data exploration to figure out some of the root causes behind this finding. And so through by continuously analyzing this data in an impactful, meaningful way, that then helped this program evolve and expand and secure additional funding. And I'll say that the donor was very much a partner in this whole evaluation exercise, which I think is critical. And sometimes a myth and a disconnect that I've seen between nonprofits and their funders, thinking that the funders just want to see the fully baked, ready, glossy, flashy, success stories. When often I hear from funders that actually they like being in the mix. They like to see the story as it's shaping, as it's evolving, not necessarily just at the sort of end state. So that's just sort of a way to think about navigating change in a data-driven, evaluation, embracing way. Let's look at building power. And in this time in particular, when nonprofits are under threat from, everything from having their 501c3 status revoked to seeing, funding streams cut, questioning from policymakers and communities alike of what is their purpose, what is their impact, what is their value. It can be important, it's as important as ever to take charge of the narrative and take charge of the, of our own relevance and importance as a civic society, and the sort of critical services that the nonprofit community and sector provides in America. And if you have not already developed an advocacy strategy this is a critical time to do so, because it's really through advocacy that we can take back our power, we can tell our own stories, we can shape the narrative and the public perception about our work and about the impact that we have. I know many nonprofits are weary of advocacy because of sort of a connection between advocating and lobbying. And we all know as 501c3s, we can't actively lobby. But I think most people know that, in lobbying comes into play only when you're actually saying, pass this bill or pass this particular policy or refute this particular bill. What we're doing in advocacy is really just educating about our work and about our priorities, and about the impact that we're having in the community vis-a-vis our various stakeholders and constituents. And absolutely 100%, every single nonprofit has the ability, the right, and the potential to be incredibly helpful towards the cause, towards whatever cause, when you fully embrace the advocacy. And even, regardless of size of organization, I mean, bigger organizations obviously have entire advocacy departments, but even smaller organizations can often just show up to a town hall community testimony opportunity and share, what's going on with their work. And this is where data and evaluation can be really, really powerful when you show up to those meetings and those spaces. A lot of times, we don't get a lot of time. We get maybe a couple of minutes, maybe 5, maybe 10 with a policymaker or decision maker. And so having those clear messages, both numerical impact as well as qualitative stories, can be really powerful, in sharing with people. So, for example, an organization shows up to a meeting and can show that 90% of their participants graduate from high school, compared to 75% of the general public, the general high school graduation rates in their area, or that youth crime rates have decreased by 20% in their program's target jurisdiction. A student could share how the program helped him stay in school, or a local employer could testify, on behalf of the program, saying how it helped him recruit the talent that he needed. And similar to the example that I shared before with the donor, by bringing powerful, not just anecdotal stories, but backed up by quantitative comparisons and analysis, that allows the decision maker, the policy maker, to be really clear on why this particular program or initiative matters. All right. So those are just 3 quick snapshot examples of how data and evaluation can help us strengthen our organizations, building resilience, preparing for change, going through change, and standing our ground amidst changing environments around us. You already indicated a little bit in the beginning that for the most part, most organizations feel like data and evaluation important, have some practices already in place, but that there could be some gaps. And some of you, are already starting from an earlier point in your data and evaluation journey. So I wanted to offer up an evaluation tool that I've developed after talking to a lot of organizations who, simply said, I don't know where to start. And well, it's usually good to start with sort of a truer sense of where you are. So in order to set up a data and evaluation practice that can really serve you both in compliance and strategic ways, we want to make sure that data and evaluation practices are relevant, integrated, grounded, harnessed, and timely. So relevant means essentially, are we collecting data that truly measures impact and reflects our organization's mission? Meaning, is it data for us or for somebody else? Integrated means, is data used across departments, programs, or is it siloed? Grounded means, do we actually use data to make program and funding choices, that data for decision-making piece? Harnessed means, does data collection add value to our staff, or is it a burden? You know, when staff just have to collect data without seeing the value of why that data is being collected, it can often contribute to a sense of resentment. And are we actually timely in our data collection? Are we collecting it frequently enough to be actionable? So this tool can be found in a sort of a quick 2-page audit guide that you can access from my website. I will drop that into the chat as well. And you're welcome to, to download that, to use it just on your, with yourself. It doesn't usually take more than 10 minutes to complete. You can put the prompts into an AI tool to ask you these questions, and then you just have a conversation partner that way. Or you can use it as a team exercise to just check in with your data and evaluation practices as a little bit of a step back. And figure out from there, what are the exact things we feel like we're doing well, and where do we need to go from here? All right, I see some more folks have joined us since we started. This recording will be shared, as will the deck. So if you didn't have a chance to hear everything, you're welcome to go back later. At this point, Sarah, I think we have time for a couple of questions.
Awesome. Question number 1 is, in terms of this advocacy, could you provide a specific example what NGOs have done this well, but without ending up putting a target on our back?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can go local. So just recently in my home county of Fairfax in Virginia, the county had to cut 10% of its overall budget. And there were a lot of things pertaining to nonprofits that were on the chopping block, including a consolidated funding pool, including a specific after-school program that nonprofits were the implementing partners for, and it was a very, very well-organized, well-coordinated advocacy effort to essentially write the local supervisors, show up to the public hearings, and call the county staff from all angles, really just letting them know that we understand the budget cuts are real, but these are all the things that our nonprofits, this is what our nonprofit is doing, and this is why it's so mission critical to us, to our community, to the county, and to the values that you elected officials aspire to. So for example, on the after school program, it was, the nonprofit community pointed out that this was initially created to fight crime, because after the crime rates were, had among youth were most prevalent, in those hours, 3 to 6 p.m. between school letting out and home for the evening. And so that's why the county initially had invested all this money into an a robust after school program in middle schools. And so pointing that out, plus hearing directly from the youth that, were prepared by various nonprofits to come and share their own stories, sign on letters, a whole bunch of activities led the county to essentially stop that budget cut line item. All right, do we have time for one more?
We do, yes. Joel was wondering, what would you say are some good metrics to track for youth programming, specifically an academic mentoring program? And he's wondering both quantitative and qualitative.
Oh, that is such a great question. And I actually am a volunteer president for an after-school youth organization that recently revamped our monitoring and evaluation practices. So I would love, Jewel, to follow up with you offline and kind of share what we've done in the past. But I can share in short that it's a combination of tracking report cards from the school, as well as having our own assessment to kind of check up progress, because many of our participants are, English as their second language learners, which doesn't always lend themselves well to, the grade level metrics of progress. So those are just some of the, that's a quick answer there. But I've put my my contact information on the screen. And you, as well as anybody else, is more than invited. In fact, strongly encouraged to get in touch with me for follow-up. Would love to chat and sort of dig into your particular data and evaluation questions, any challenges. I'd be delighted to be a thought partner to help think through.
Awesome. Thank you, Maria. And then I just want to let Grace know I'm going to send her question over to you. She has a really specific one, and I just want to make sure that was answered. So Grace, just letting you know that. But thank you, Maria. This workshop has come to a close. If you are interested in receiving the recording and materials from today's workshop, you can download them on the bottom of our free webinar page or email us at program@nonprofitlearninglab.org. We will also be sending them, but just in case you do not receive them. Thank you so much for participating. And again, thank you, Maria, for educating our community.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and thanks for everyone who called in.